Hello and welcome to episode 6 of my trip down memory lane back to the Pacific Crest Trail and my Thru-hike exactly 10 years ago. In the last episode, we hiked to Agua Dulce and spent the afternoon there, bought some food, rested a bit in the shade, and then we hiked out again in the evening. We had to walk a bit along the road, but then we were back in the countryside relatively soon. And you can already see that the desert is definitely the topic now. In this episode, we'll finally be walking through the Mojave Desert, which is something that we've been looking forward to for a long time, because it's supposed to be an extremely hot, extremely dry place, and we were kind of excited about it, but also a bit scared, of course. But as I said, I really liked the desert, and I always enjoyed these desert views. I took so many photos that I can't even show them all because, to be honest, they all look similar in the end, but I always thought it was beautiful. Took out my camera, took a picture, and just enjoyed this amazing scenery. As you can see, it's quite barren, dry terrain, and when water flowed somewhere, like here on the left, there was a spring. There were sometimes a few trees, or as you can see here on the side facing away from the sun, where the moisture can last a little longer in the morning, there were sometimes a few more bushes and so on, but all in all, it was pretty dry, and whenever there was an oasis like this, or like on the next slide here, we were always very, very happy to use it for a break. Here you can see a typical spring. They were usually just pipes that came out of the ground, slightly enclosed springs, where you could put your bottle underneath, but it was more of a trickle than a flow, so it sometimes took 2 or 3 minutes to fill up a liter of water, or even longer. It was real work, because you had to fill all these liters and then you have to filter it, and yeah. But as you can see here, it was always quite green around the springs, so sometimes a bit greener if there was a larger body of water nearby, like here. It was always particularly mean when you could see a lake like this from the distance, but the trail itself it didn't go along this lake, so you could see it and you were longing for the cool water and the swim, but well, you couldn't reach it all the time. You have to imagine it like this. When the water comes out of the spring, it's nice and cool. But then you put it in your bottles, and after half an hour, it's, super hot. And all you long for is cold water. And of course, that's actually counterproductive because drinking cold water generates heat in your body. But I mean, we are somehow wired to want to refresh ourselves with a cold drink. And of course, that wasn't possible in the desert. But you appreciated it all the more when you could drink cold water directly at a spring, or when there was a cool box full of sodas provided by a trail angel. And yes, you also learned to really appreciate the hospitality of the Americans, and I was often really impressed and moved by it. One of my absolute favorite stops was Casa de Luna, the house of the Andersons. They are very legendary trail angels on the PCT. They are no longer active. They have moved to Washington, I think, but for years they opened their house here in Southern California to the whole trail community, and almost every hiker went there. So Casa de Luna is a house with a huge garden behind it, where 2 hippies lived and created a kind of paradise for hikers. There really was everything you needed. We pitched our tent here. They had this amazing manzanita tree forest behind their house. It really was a gigantic area. They had a disc golf course there and this giant forest, and it was the perfect place to camp. And in Germany, an estate like this would be super expensive, and I was amazed by this gigantic property of the Andersons. And, nevertheless, we pitched our tent there, and then we just enjoyed our time. We had a shower, there was lots of food. There's the famous taco salad, of course. I think it's beans, jalapenos, tomatoes, tortilla chips, sour cream, and olives. All sorts of different things that you put together from different pots. And the Andersons are known for serving this in the evening and pancakes in the morning. And, of course, we really enjoyed that. And we also met a lot of people there who we hadn't seen for a long time, but it was, it's kind of a meeting point where several people kind of get stranded and stay for 2 or 3 days. We only stayed one night, I think, but we arrived pretty early there, and so we could enjoy our stay there almost the entire day. We arrived at the road where the trailhead was, and I got there first, and Terry, so Mrs. Anderson, came past in her car. She was driving past me and apparently saw me out of her corner of the eye or whatever. And then she drove backwards and she asked me, "Hey, do you want to come down?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm waiting for 2 friends." And she was like, "Yeah, sure, let's wait a minute." And then my friends came and then she took us all down with her. And it was so nice right away. She's such a lovely woman and an incredibly nice person. And you immediately felt so comfortable around her, even though you didn't know her at all. Of course, I knew she existed because she's quite famous, but I had never met her. And I immediately felt at home with her and at her place somehow. She's great company, and she was just a super sweet, motherly type somehow. And it was really nice. And this way of her ran through the whole setting of Casa de Luna. The whole place had this great family atmosphere, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, we could also paint stones. The whole garden, you can see it here in the background, the whole garden was full of these painted stones. And every year she stretched out a bed sheet here where everyone had to sign. And in the morning, photos were always taken of everyone who had spent the night here in front of this bed sheet. And so we would stand there in front of it, and then a friend of hers or something would take the camera, and Terry would stand next to her, and then she would turn around and pull down her pants so that you could see her ass. And of course everybody started laughing right away, and that's when the friend took the photo. And I guess she always does that because she said, well, it makes the best laughs. And she also said, well, it's called Casa de Luna for a reason. And yeah, it's just a perfect way to round off the whole experience. It was an amazing stay, and I really think back on it with great pleasure. It was just a nice place that stands for warmth, for freedom, for hospitality, and for the simple life with everything you need and good friends. And it's kind of sad that it no longer exists, but of course the Andersons have more than earned their retirement. And I wish them all the best, and I'm forever very grateful for this experience. We were then driven back by someone with a truck, and that was the first time we got a ride in the back of a pickup, and that was really cool. So it's this classic hitchhiking image, and you know, for us Germans, this was of course a very new experience because our Straßenverkehrsordnung, our road traffic regulations are brutal, and this is simply not possible on a German road. But we enjoyed it very much, and it's just a nice way to hitchhike and to drive, being in the back, and you know, feeling the breeze on the skin. Yeah, pretty close to the trail. After that, we cracked the 500-mile mark, which is 800 kilometers, which is the longest distance I have ever hiked in one go. I had hiking experience before, but it was more like 300 kilometers or so, and 800 is a really big mark. And at that point, we were somehow sure that we could do it. We could finish the entire trail. We became strong. And we realized, okay, this is working. We found our rhythm, we found our pace, and how much we can hike, how much we can do in a day, and when to hike and where to hike. And yeah, it's working, and we can make it to Canada. So it was also a cool time to realize that. Here you can see a typical water cistern, a water source. So under this thing here, there is the water, and you unscrewed this lid here, and then you could take the water out with a cord with a bucket hanging from it. And that water was always a bit sketchy, so there were insects in there and trash, and well, but if it's the only water you have in the desert, then that's what you do. And we had water filters with us, and they filter out anything except viruses. And viruses are probably not an issue there. If they are, then they are noroviruses, and you would usually catch them in town or on toilets or whatever. That's also the reason why at least in 2015, we hikers never shook hands. So we either did a fist bump or bumped our feet together to greet each other, because, you can imagine why. Yes, here we are back at a slightly higher altitude, a bit of woodland. It's always nice, a welcome change to have a bit of shade, and I can remember this spot here very well, this brilliant view, because you were just a bit elevated and looked down into the valley, into this incredibly dry desert valley, and then the mountains behind it again. And that was just one of the foothills of the Mojave Desert, I think, where you could see what you were heading towards. And it was a bit like, okay, it's really very exposed, very flat, very dry, very hot. And yeah, we were definitely excited. And our plan was to get to Hikertown now. Hikertown is another place where a trail angel opens his house with a completely different reputation than Casa de Luna. Namely, a reputation that is, everything there is a bit weird. So the guy is weird, the place is weird, and people have felt uncomfortable there and so on. We knew this, but, we had somehow decided to walk there anyway, because it's the point of, before you walk over the aqueduct. And the aqueduct is, we get into that in a minute, but it's just a very long stretch without water. And Hikertown is the last point where you can access water before this stretch. So, of course, we planned to go there. And when we arrived here in the evening on this hill, I say Hikertown is down here in the valley. And we set our alarm clock for very early in the morning, 4 o'clock or something like that, to get down there before the midday heat, because we wanted to spend the entire daytime in Hikertown and then hike out in the evening overnight, because then, of course, you simply use less water if you sweat less. That's logical. Well, anyway, we set up our tent in the evening with this beautiful view and at this beautiful spot with a great sunset. And the next morning we woke up again with a great sunrise. And then, I don't know, at 5 or something, we started walking. And it was a really nice morning, because it was still pleasantly cool, of course, because the sun had only just come up. But the weather was still great, of course. And we didn't have much of a walk ahead of us. I think it was like 6 miles or something like that to Hikertown. And so a good hour's walk, and then we'd been there. And on the way, it went down again. We were now on a hill where it was a bit shadier, and now it went back down into the desert. And I found this site here, which I think is very American for me. It's so wasteland-like, these ruined cars standing around in the middle of nowhere, where you always wonder how they even get there in the first place and why. So who puts a car like that in the middle of the desert where you cannot drive to, and who does this work? But there were always a lot of bullet holes in it, so maybe they just put them there to use them as, I don't know, a playground for their war games or as target practice or whatever. So yeah. It was nevertheless an interesting sight. And then we were in Hikertown.
Ich bin jetzt hier in einem...
I now arrived here in a really, really strange place.
Das nennt sich Hikertown.
It's called Hikertown.
Und hier ist einfach
and there's just nobody here.
Ich bin einfach durch dieses Tor reingekommen.
I just came in through this gate and you can
man sieht hier diese ganzen,
see all these, it looks like
Filmkulissen
movie sets here, totally crazy.
Total abgefahren. Da hinten läuft ein
There's
Huhn.
a chicken running at the back.
Irgendwer wohnt
Someone
hier
lives
und
here and just lets people in,
lässt
get
die
water,
Leute
relax,
einfach rein,
shade.
Wasser holen, entspannen, Schatten. Ey, das ist echt...
Hey, that's all
Richtig
really
merkwürdig.
weird, yeah.
Hallo?
This is Hikertown, and it was really, really weird place. So I got there and there was nobody there, and I thought that was weird anyway. At all the other Trail Angel places, we were somehow welcomed either by themselves, like with Terry, or by some volunteers who were working for them. But here there was simply no person at all. And somehow you always have a certain, threshold to cross a locked gate to simply enter a site without being actively invited. However, there was a sign, and yes, it did say that you can go in and so on, and of course we did. And then it was just this place with these movie sets, so somehow it was all quite bizarre, but also very cool. And then there were various caravans standing around, and we went into this garage, and there were already a few other hikers, and it was apparently all meant to be like that somehow. And at some point, the owner came and drove us to a general store nearby in his van. We then bought some ice cream and so on, and spent the afternoon there. At some point, I didn't feel so well anymore, and I laid down in a caravan, and then at some point, I got stomach cramps like hell, and spent the next few hours primarily on the loo. And that wasn't so nice, of course, especially because of the dehydration. Because we had planned to walk a really long distance without water now. Fortunately, the guy had told us that he had set up a water cache about halfway along the route. Somehow, there were a few 100 liters and so on. That was really reassuring. I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but it was definitely really far without water and through the hottest part of the PCT. And to know halfway there was a water cache that you could trust because the guy had set it up himself, who told us. That was, of course, very, very nice to know. Well, nonetheless, I struggled, but it didn't help, and we hiked out in the evening. Oh, by the way, the guy was really nice, so somehow we didn't feel uncomfortable there, but you still hear that from people today, and I don't know if he is just strange with some people, but we didn't have any problems at all, and neither did the other hikers we spent time there with. So, we hiked out, and this is the legendary aqueduct. Water flows through it, so you walk for miles and miles above the water. Sometimes you can even hear it goggling in the pipe, but you cannot reach it. And that's a really strange feeling, knowing that if you don't have water now, you could die of thirst, even though water is so close by. It's really crazy. And I always wonder why they don't just leave a tap hanging out somewhere, because that would probably be easy to implement. But, the government is probably not as hospitable as the people who live there. Anyway, we went out in the evening and, well, as I said, I felt very weak, but we walked anyway, and at some point we were fine. So I started taking the medication that they had given me in the hospital, and that started to take effect over the next few days. So that was definitely the worst day I had on a PCT, even though a lot of wonderful things happened. But physically it was definitely the most demanding and probably the most dangerous day I've had. But we hiked into the night, and it was easy to walk. It wasn't hot anymore. As you can see, I didn't even use the umbrella, and you could just walk into the night relatively relaxed. At night itself, we had this view here, which was also very exciting. This is the light pollution of Los Angeles. And I think at the closest, you were like 15 miles from Hollywood or something like that. And I think it's totally bizarre that these completely different worlds exist so close to each other. You know, in Hollywood, there's glamour and money and big mansions and everything. And we were here with minimal equipment in the dirt, eating ramen noodles. And I think that's just bizarre and crazy. But it was definitely cool to see. And it was somehow also nice to know that it's so easy to escape the hustle and bustle, the stress of the big city. Just get in a car for a few miles or even walk for my sake. And you're in the most peaceful nature. And in the evening we set up our tents at the water cache mentioned by the guy from Hikertown, and we decided to hike up to it because then we wouldn't have to carry an extra water for the next morning. And we had just set up there and checked, and there really was a lot of water. It was a tank, and we packed ourselves into our beds relatively quickly because we hiked until really late. And the next morning we continued our hike with a full tank of water. And fortunately, I was fine again. So the day was just the worst, and then somehow I was okay again, and the medication kicked in. I don't know if I got rid of everything on the toilet or what. But in any case, I was fine again the next day. And of course, we hiked through the heat again because, we were in the Mojave Desert now. And there was this huge wind farm. I don't even know if they were running at the time. I don't remember it being super windy there, especially not since we had the comparison to Cabazon, which was extremely windy. But here I think we had a calm day or something. But potentially it looks like you could collect a lot of wind energy there. And so it went on. We usually hiked into the night to make distance because it was easy to hike then. Mojave was just brutally hot. I think we had a year where it wasn't as intense as normal, but I thought it was super brutal. So it was definitely the hottest part of the trail up to that point. There would be another one later, Hat Creek Rim, where it was somehow much more brutal. But it was definitely intense, and above all, there was no shade. And then we had to hike through this burnt area again, and it was kind of sad. There were trees in the pass, but they were gone, and we walked through this area in the brutal heat with no shade, and it was double depressing. So I can remember being badly bitten by ants on this stretch of the trail. I was walking along the trail, and suddenly ants came up, running up my shoe and bit into my foot through my sock, and it was incredibly painful. You can't imagine that. I think it was one of the worst pain I ever had. I also fell down to the ground immediately, so they kind of paralyzed my leg for a short time, or the pain paralyzed me, I don't know. In any case, I was immediately on the ground after the bite and thought, shit, what's going on now? And I shook the ants off, of course, and they were no longer aggressive. I don't know if I accidentally stepped on their next to their nest or whatever. And in any case, I was lying there, and luckily the ants were gone, and I thought, shit, what's happening now? Because I just fell with paralyzation, but it was it went away very quickly. So I don't know, maybe a minute or so, I was fine again, and the pain was gone. But it was really shocking and really frightening. But I think the poison of the ants was just to briefly knock out the enemy, run away, and then it's good again. I don't know. But it hurt like hell, and luckily it only lasted a short time, and I was fine again. Yeah, so this is very nice too. We have seen the horned lizard several times now, and I took this picture here. Well, I think they are, what, up to. I thought it was really funny somehow, and then I walked on. And later I showed this picture to my girlfriend, and she showed me this picture. She took it, and of course they're the same ones. They were at the same spot on the trail. And I think this is so human. First, doing it, and then lying in each other's arms afterwards. I thought it was somehow totally bizarre that they were lying there like that. And it was in the middle of the trail, so they weren't shy or anything. It was quite interesting, and maybe some reptile experts can tell us whether they were really just, doing it, or were they fighting? Because I googled mating horned lizards, and it looked different. So I have no idea. I don't know what they are doing here. Maybe you can tell me. And then we arrived in Tehachapi, which was our next planned town stop. And there are several ways to get there. You can also go to Mojave town from the road crossing, but we chose Tehachapi because it's bigger and, there's just more. And we called a trail angel from Tehachapi by phone to shuttle us into town because it was kind of impossible to hitchhike there. There were lots of cars driving, but nobody stopped. And we were then kindly driven by a very nice lady. She also showed us around town a bit from the car and told us where we can eat and where we can shop and everything. And then she left us at the airport. I remember she didn't want to accept any donations, which I thought was very great of her. We always offered to contribute to the cost that the trail angels had to help us. And especially in this situation where we called her to pick us up, but she didn't want to. And I remember that very well because it amazed me how, she wasn't even volunteering to shuttle at that day. She was at home probably or at work, I don't know. And she gave us her time and her money, and she didn't want to have anything in return, which I think is so, so selfless and so admirable. And yeah, thank you very much for this. So she then dropped us at the camp at the airport, which was, I don't know if it's still an open campground, but back then you could camp at the airport for a donation and use the pilot's lounge and everything, and that was pretty nice. And it was funny because it was really in the middle of the airport. So you can see here's our tent, and this is the runway. It's a sports airport, of course, not a passenger airport, but it was still totally bizarre because we were sitting in front of our tent all the time and seeing people fly, taking off, landing, and so on. And it was kind of cool. And we were there, I think, for 2 nights because we were planning to do an extensive resupply for the next, I can't remember exactly, 4 or 5 stages or something. And yeah, this is the pilot's lounge where we washed our clothes properly. Interestingly enough, the Americans often have these washing machines that turn this way instead of that way, and they don't clean. I mean, the laundry comes out smelling reasonably fragrant, but the dirt is still on the clothes, and washing in the bathtub or in a bucket or so was so much better than these machines. And yeah, we gave everything a good soak and soaped it up, and yeah, that worked pretty well. And so then we relaxed a bit in the lounge, we watched a movie and stuff, and well, on the next slide, so now this is a little trigger warning. If you're not good with injuries, you should probably just switch off now or skip the next 2 minutes or so. You can use the time code down below. In any case, you can now see the blister I had on the ball of my foot. I just do it now. Yes, so that's the ball of my foot, and that's the gigantic blister. So I think this thing is extreme. Of course, it's all hardened and stuff like that, but I always had a fat blister in that area at the beginning, so a real blister filled with liquid, and at some point it filled with blood and it kind of hardened, and yeah, I think it's really, really gross. But also, this is also part of the trail, there's also people who lose their toenails on the trail. That did not happen to me, luckily. But yeah, blisters and we have a long story. And I always also had a shaved spot at the back of my heel. I always put tape over them later. Yeah, it's not all sunshine and roses on the trail. And physically, you have to put up with a few bruises. And yeah, as you can see from the look on my face, I was quite shocked when I took a good look at it too. But I have to say, in this state, it didn't hurt anymore. The time until it reached this stage, well, the weeks before that, they were much more painful. And at some point, I had such a severe callus that it somehow didn't hurt at all. But it does look intense, doesn't it? Yeah, but back to the pleasant parts. We did our resupply, as I said, for several stages. Here you can see me with 3 boxes, but there were more. This one on the top is not my box at all. Or maybe we filled boxes together, I can't remember exactly. In any case, my trail name is written here, eat it up. So these are definitely my boxes. Yeah. So we bought a lot of food, not just for the next stage, but also for other stages in California, in Northern California, because there are very few shopping opportunities there. There's sometimes a post office or a small mini store or something like that, small general store, but there are actually only very rudimentary shopping facilities, which is why we send out these boxes with food inside, which most hikers actually do. There are hikers who pre-pack all boxes at home for all the town stops and send a box to every place. We didn't do that, of course, because nobody could send it out for us from the US. And also, I think it's completely unnecessary because you can see that here in Tehachapi, for example, you can shop wonderfully, and in other towns too. But well, if you don't want the hustle in town and just want to get in and out quickly or simply relax in town, because it is a lot of work to go around shopping and packing everything and all the logistics behind it. It's really hard work. But so if you just want to relax in town, then I can understand why you would do that, but we didn't do it. But we packed several boxes in Tehachapi, for example, to send to Kennedy Meadows, and then a few more towns beyond Kennedy Meadows. until we reach the next big city. And that's the usual procedure. You write down roughly when you plan to arrive, and then where you've sent it, a post office or a hotel or whatever, they keep it there until that day and a little bit beyond, and then, I don't know, they throw it away if you don't show up or whatever. Put it in a hiker box or something. Exactly. That's definitely what we did here. And apart from that, we just enjoyed the town life in Tehachapi a bit. I really enjoyed Tehachapi. It has a lot to offer. We went out to eat several times. There was a German bakery, which, it wasn't really German. The pastries just had German names, It was more German than what you would usually get from American bakeries or from the grocery stores. But, it was called Pumpernickel or something like that, and it wasn't Pumpernickel at all. Everything was kind of Americanized, I would say. But it was very tasty after all, and we did enjoy it very much. And once we went to a salad bar, an all-you-can-eat buffet focused on cold dishes, but it wasn't just salad. There was also like a lot of other stuff. And we were sitting there eating, and at some point people from the next table chatted to us and were like, hey, yeah, are you hiking the BCT? And we said, yeah, we are. And the woman was like, that has always been my dream. And I asked her, yeah, why didn't you do it? And then she just looks over at her 2 children who were sitting at the table with her, and yeah, because of them, which I think was quite mean. The children looked at each other and were like, okay. But, she wanted to do it, but unfortunately she had children, and we talked a bit, and they were just totally enthusiastic and totally interested in what we had already experienced and so on. And in the end, they invited us to dinner, which was really, really nice of them. And yeah, that was another great trail magic that we got, just out of pure kindness and pure niceness and a coincidental meeting at a restaurant. And whenever I experienced something like that, I've always thought it can't really be true, but because that's just something you don't know from our country. And yeah, that was our life in Tehachapi, and we spent 2 nights or 3 nights there, I can't remember exactly, and we really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really cool town stop, especially because we were staying at the airport. It was kind of a cool vibe, and it was a good place to relax and get ready for the last stage in the desert. And yes, in the next episode, we are on this last stage in the desert, going to Kennedy Meadows, and that will definitely be a special milestone, but we'll get to that in the next episode. And as always, if you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. And if you have any stories, questions, or whatever, feel free to write them in the comments. And otherwise, see you in the next episode. Ciao!